One, two, three, four.
Kia ora and welcome to another episode of SIS. My name is Erin Stroud and I am the host of our Starting in Science series. This series serves as a crash course on how to become a scientist in New Zealand. Throughout, I'll be sitting down with scientists and asking some big questions to make the journey into a science career a little less confusing and a lot more achievable. And just as a reminder, we are recording this episode from our homes, so please bear with us if the audio quality isn't quite what you're used to for this podcast. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Hilary, who is going to introduce us to today's topic.
Hi, Erin. It's good to be here. Yes. So today we have a special panel episode to celebrate International Women's Day, which will be on March 8th. So we have three scientists, and I'll let you introduce them, Erin.
Yeah, we are joined by a very star-studded panel today. Our first panel member is Dr Jill Stanley, who is the science group leader for fruit crops physiology. Jill started out as a technician over 41 years ago, and in that time has brought up 2 children and completed a PhD. She is currently the Vice President of the International Society for Horticultural Science and was recently awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award from Science New Zealand. She also received a New Zealand Human Resources Award for learning and development capabilities for initiating and developing a mentoring program within plant and food research that has been a model for other Crown Research Institutes. God, it's quite a list of achievements. We're also joined by Dr Kieren Arthur, who gained her PhD in virology, specializing in plant virology and plant virus interactions before moving into research management. She is passionate about helping scientists achieve their goals and has been a member of the Association of Women in Science Committee for the past 4 years, recently stepping into the role of national co-convener. And finally, we're joined by Dr. Sarah Moss. Sarah is a plant molecular biologist specializing in plant development, gaining her PhD in 2018. Sarah is also a co-chair on the Royal Society Te Aoparangi Early Career Researcher Forum, where she advocates for early career researchers as well as equity and diversity in science. Now, we'd just like to acknowledge that our panel today does not reflect the diversity of women and people who identify as women in science, and so our viewpoints are likely based from a select perspective. However, we firmly believe that all people who identify as women should be represented and valued in academia and beyond.
Agree completely. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Lena.
Hi. Kia ora.
So women like yourselves have made an impact in science for a very long time, and I'd really like on this day, International Women's Day, to name just a few in the field of biology. So Rosalind Franklin, of course, the chemist, discovered the double helix structure of DNA, and her male colleagues, of course, were awarded the Nobel Prize. Flossie Wong-Stahl is a virologist and molecular biologist who was the first to clone HIV, which enabled the development of an HIV test. Jennifer Doudna, biochemist, was a primary developer of CRISPR technology, which is changing the world of gene editing. And Kathleen Carrico, biochemist, has worked for decades on RNA-mediated immune activation, and her patented technology formed the basis of COVID mRNA-based vaccines. So women in science, as you can see, are changing the world, and these are just 4 of the many women who are making an impact. So to the panel, I'd like to begin with 2 questions. What inspired you into a career in science, and are there any women in science in particular that have inspired you? Should we start with you, Jill?
I guess really I had a really inspiring science teacher at school, not a woman, but still he was great, and he really encouraged me and got me to want to go to university and do science. I didn't know exactly what field, but I just went and started doing science. And it was there I met someone, boyfriend of a friend who was doing the horticultural science degree at Massey. I was at Waikato. And it sounded so exciting. I said, yes, that's what I want to do. So the next year I swapped and moved to Massey and did horticultural science degree. In terms of women that have inspired me, I think probably I was pretty impressed with Marie Curie, who was obviously the first woman to receive a Nobel Prize. And I thought that was pretty cool that women could actually do some amazing things. And it wasn't till I got a job in science that I started to actually meet some women scientists and get impressed with what they were doing.
That's great. And how about you, Sarah?
I think I was really lucky growing up that my parents always really encouraged learning through kind of observation and investigations into kind of nature and the world. But then going into high school, I had a really amazing horticulture teacher who just really fostered a love of plants. And then I had an amazing biology teacher in my final year of school, and we had a golden rice assignment that kind of got me hooked. So I went down to Palmerston North to go to Massey as well, and then just had really amazing lecturers there who helped kind of guide me through and find the area that I was really interested in, which happened to be the molecular biology. And in terms of women who've really inspired me, it tends to be the day-to-day scientists that I meet. I think my first summer studentship and then master's was with my supervisor, Erica, and I think she's just been a massive inspiration to me through my career, just kind of showing me that you can be kind of authentically yourself and an amazing scientist and a successful mother and just a person, but a scientist too. So, yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. There are definitely some wonderful female role models, certainly in biology in Auckland. And how about you, Kieren?
Well, I have a very similar story to both Sarah and Jill, but my mother was a high school science teacher. So I got exposed to science from a very young age, and we were always doing science, thinking about science and looking at science at home and in our everyday lives. So I was exposed really early. So honestly, I have memories of wanting to get a PhD when I was very young, because I thought that's what you needed to be a scientist. I didn't know what a PhD was, but I know I needed it. So I always have really been passionate about scientists, and I almost actually had a near miss and switched to classics. But my mother made me go and talk to the biology teacher to make sure that there was no dissections, because I don't like dissections. Plants, great. Molecular biology, great. Dissecting animals, I'm not so comfortable, not very good at, bit of an icky stomach. So I almost had a near miss and went into the arts, but my mum made me go and talk to the biology teacher to find out, do some observations, and I worked out it was okay to do it. So I still took biology.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm glad it turned out that way. That was great.
Yeah.
I also tried to avoid as many dissections as possible. That's what's great about plants. You don't have to feel quite so bad.
How about you, Erin?
Yeah, I won't bore the listeners because I've talked about this in the last podcast that I was the host on as well. But basically, I was just that kid that you could never get out the garden. I was always digging up worms and ripping leaves to shreds and doing other naughty kid things, I guess. So yeah, it was kind of a no-brainer that I ended up in science. But in terms of women that have inspired me into science, I guess a similar story to Kieren. My grandmother has a PhD. She got her PhD in mangroves, actually, and has done a lot of really cool research. And I didn't really appreciate that until I got a bit older, because same story, Kieren. I was like, PhD, I don't know what that is, but I know it makes you do research, which is cool. And then over time, I've appreciated that way more. So she's been a massive role model for me the whole way through.
That's great.
Okay, so following that, what do you think is so important about having women in STEM? Kieren, would you like to start with that question, being the national co-convener of AWIS?
Sure. I think the basic thing is, why shouldn't we have women in STEM? Like any other career, society is made up of both male and female and non-binary people. Why should anyone be restricted to do what they love and what they're excited about? But I think really why it's important to have women in STEM or any, diverse perspectives is the diversity in thinking and life experiences. No one has the same journey in life, the same memories, the same family. You're built from the experiences and the knowledge that you acquire. And that just shapes how you think and how you interact. And when we're trying to deal with really difficult things and exploring the boundaries of knowledge and make scientific discovery, having lots of different perspectives actually may be necessary to get the breakthroughs that you want. So I think having a diversity of thought and approaches really opens up different ways of thinking about the same problem. And sometimes opening up new opportunities and tackling things a different way.
It's a great point. I think it's really important to have as diverse teams as possible so we can get all of those different types of thinking in there. What about you, Sarah? Have you had any experience with this?
I think Kieren just summed it up perfectly. But yeah, I think part of it at the moment is that we need to really make sure there is that representation, because although, yeah, definitely why shouldn't people be in science? But until people actually can see themselves in those roles, like the more women we can have or more gender diverse people we can have in those positions, the more people and children can look into science and go, actually, that is something that I can do. I can identify with these people. And I think, because that's always really helped me, is to look around and just see people who at a core level are just like you, just a bit further along in their lives. And I think one of the other things is, I think women do often bring a whole set of things to the table, especially in terms of relational skills. I think how we're raised, even if that is a flawed thing, is quite different from men at times. And we kind of foster this whole relational thing and being nice and kind and just being good to each other. And I think sometimes removing some of that ego that can get kind of relatively entrenched in a classically male-dominated field such as STEM kind of is really helping to kind of mellow it, I think, and kind of make it more approachable and actually a safer place for women to work in.
Yeah, great points.
I think it brings more balance. And as you said, Sarah, women have grown up with a slightly different perspective and different experiences to men, and just bring that whole diversity of strengths, of thought patterns, just different dimensions that really make teams work better.
I remember going to an AWIS conference, and one of the speakers was a retired scientist, female scientist, and she had always said that she wore pantsuits, she tried to be like a man in science. And she was on a panel with a very young scientist who she was just very authentically kind of herself. She wasn't trying to fit into anything. And it was so amazing to see in a generation how much of a difference there was. You could now be yourself rather than having to fit in and be more dominant or more masculine.
Yeah, I think I've seen a change over the 40 years. When I first started, there weren't so many women, and you really had to sort of push yourself forward a bit, and you really noticed the fact that there were hardly any men. The one good thing was that you didn't have to queue in the bathrooms, but
we'll take the wins where we can get them, eh? What about you, Hilary?
Oh gosh, yes. So I did some digging, of course, did some research, and because I've known for a long time that women, particularly in poor female representation in STEM, is particularly bad in technology, and it's so important for us at the moment because our world is being so driven by the technologies we use. It's increasingly reliant on the technology. And so I was reading this Wall Street Journal article, and they say, programs that are coded by men are inevitably designed for men in mind, and mostly men are developing the algorithms for machine learning. So machines are learning to cater to men. Some of the examples they provide are LinkedIn's search algorithm was found to correct to or present men's names when common women's names were entered into the search field. For example, Stephanie was corrected to Stephen. Google's ad settings delivered ads for jobs paying above $200,000 to male online profiles 6 times more often than to female profiles. Google image searches for professions were skewed. For instance, the search for CEO retrieved 11% women, even though in the US 27 of companies are led by women. And a search for authors produced 25% women when 56% of US authors are women. And the examples went on and on and on. So a lack of female representation, particularly in technology, is worsening female representation in real life. So that only exacerbates unconscious bias rather than helping to rectify it. But I agree with you all completely that right now we're facing unprecedented complex issues, and the only way we're going to solve them efficiently and effectively is if we have diverse thought. So we need all intersections of society having their voices and ideas heard to address those issues. And as you say, Sarah, females really do. It's such a stereotype. Sorry, but we do operate differently, and we are led to conform to male norms, and that can lead to transactional interactions at work, and many of the research, much of the research of Brené Brown and all of her field shows that organisations are healthy and thriving when you're allowed to have transformational interactions. So when people are allowed to be themselves, bring their whole selves to work, that leads to transformational change and as a whole. So, and also it's having female and more women in STEM and other industries it's really, the data shows that there is when the workforce is more gender balanced, companies can be more successful, and men show greater happiness and contentment when in gender balanced organisations as well. So there's the reasons go on and on and on for why it's important to have women in STEM and equal representation throughout all industries. Yeah. How about you,
really
Erin?
Interesting research there, I think. There's a couple of words that I picked out of what you've just said, Hilary, and I think representation's like the biggest one. It's kind of what we're largely falling on. Rather than sharing my perspective, I'd actually really like it if Sarah wouldn't mind sharing her Barbie doll story.
I can share that, yeah. Sadly, she's at work, but I abandoned her when I moved home. So I spotted a scientist Barbie in the shops one Christmas, and I was like, perfect, I will get that for my niece. And it's got wonderful statements on the back, kind of like, scientists explore the world, they look at these things, and you can too. And so, I loved Barbies growing up, so I really liked the idea that they had this series of dolls that were representing a whole bunch of different careers that women could have, not just being a teacher or a nurse. You could be a vet or a marine biologist, and you could do whatever you wanted. So I gave that to my niece, but my mum also gave one to me that Christmas as well, as a bit of a joke, but she's been sitting on my desk ever since then. And I appreciate that she has closed-toed shoes, which we all know is very important for working in a lab. So, but just going back to some of the stuff that Hilary was saying, I think really, really does highlight why it's important to have women. Like if you look at science research, clinical studies often are on men because women are too complicated because we have cyclical periods every month. Or, a lot of us do. And that really changes how we respond to drugs and exercise and a whole bunch of things. So we're too complicated, so we're just excluded for the most part, which means things aren't designed for us. And then sometimes you have men designing products that women are like, I'm not sure we needed that. Or if we were to design it ourselves, this is how we would have done it instead. So if we actually have women involved in those processes, not only are we represented in the science, but hopefully we're having things that are designed for us or will be beneficial, and kind of health issues that are very women-centric, kind of endometriosis, like they would be more researched. I think, I've heard it many a times, like if men had cramps as bad as women do, we would have sorted something much better out a long time ago for that. So it's kind of things like that the more women we have, the more people who are allies of women in the field, the better it is. And unfortunately, there are still massively underrepresented areas, especially engineering and kind of computer sciences. And I think that's changing. But I have a colleague who I think she's only a couple of years younger than me, so early 30s. And when she was doing computer science at high school, she was the only girl. And when she did really well on an assignment, they all accused her of cheating, because how could she possibly have done well because she was a girl? And so I think it's just making sure that we not only have the opportunities to go into that, but we have those role models where you can go, well, of course I can do this because they're doing it.
Can I just jump in very quickly and say the other area that I think is really important is in science leadership, and getting more people up in those upper layers of the leadership in science organisations or universities, and having more women, more diversity there is really important, because that can have a big impact on trickling down through everything.
Completely agree.
And just making sure that the women we do have in those positions are allies. Because I think sometimes there's that competitiveness of like, well, I got here through all the struggle, so you should struggle too. And so it's making sure that when we do have people in positions of power, especially women, that they are people who are very supportive of bringing everyone with them.
Yes, there's a real scarcity culture with that as well. It's like there's only room for a few of us, so I'm going to take one of those positions, and I'm going to hold on to it tight. But there's a study, which showed that when 17% of women are in a group, men believe there's equal representation. When there's 33% of women in the group, men think that there's too many women.
Oh.
And that 17-30, those percentages come up so often. It's like there's a invisible cap. It's like, okay, now we have too many women here, when it reaches 33%. But, yeah.
Which is fascinating for many reasons. But I remember meeting up with Kate Hanna from the University of Auckland at one point, and they were having a lot of discussions around making sure there was, roughly 50-50 women and men. And a male colleague of his said, but what if at some point there are more women? That's just not fair.
Sorry.
And, just the irony of it is kind of amazing to think that's how it's always been in the opposite direction. What's so bad if occasionally it skews the other way? And I think in politics at the moment, the Labour Party is doing pretty well for women. And I think it kind of brings in these suggestions about do we preferentially hire one person over another based on their ethnicity or gender or diversity. And it tends to get people's hackles up when you do discuss that stuff. So it's really interesting to think about how we are actually going to address these issues.
We've got an interesting situation. I'm on the International Society Hort Science Board of Directors, and this board, we actually have 5 women out of 7 directors. And it was only about 4 or 5 boards ago that the first woman was selected. So it's gone from all male dominated to this time 5 women. It's just fantastic.
Yay. Congrats.
Yeah.
Well done, Jill. Well done.
Kieren, did you have,
Yeah, I was going to say, sometimes I think 1 is the loneliest number when you're the only woman in a room, or you're the first woman in a space. And it's really hard to be the first of anything in a space, whether it's the first or the only woman in a team or a group. And you're fighting two fronts. You're there to do your day job, but you're there to also be, I don't go get the coffee and take notes. I'm a researcher. My job here is to contribute, not to be your secretary or your assistant. So I think when we start to bring people through and have people in senior positions, it's not a 1 and then 2. You need to have 2 to start with, because you have double duties as a woman in science and STEM often, and when you go into roles. So having more people at the table from the start. It's not just a one. We have to go up with two.
Completely agree with that. I think a colleague of mine actually forwarded me a document the other day which had a really interesting point, which said that it's not just about bringing more women to the table, it's making sure that they're also empowered to speak. And I think we often talk about making sure that higher up panels and boards and et cetera are reflective of the diversity of the workforce, but we also need to make sure that people sitting at those tables do have the opportunity to speak and have the power that maybe the male counterparts on the same board also carry. So it's a widespread issue, isn't it? It's not going to be an easy one to tackle, but it's really encouraging to see that there is movement, and seeing, 5 out of 7 people on the board, Jill, are now women, is just fantastic.
That's fantastic. And leads nicely on to the next question, which is to the panel, either from personal experience or through general observation, what have been for you, or what do you see are the barriers and impediments for women entering and succeeding in STEM? Should we start with you, Jill? Or Kieren?
Oh,
Kieren, sorry.
Go for Kieren.
Well, I think it comes back to the point I was saying earlier. You often have like 2 or 3 jobs as a woman in science. Not only are you a woman in science as a researcher potentially, which, is a hard enough job sometimes, but you're often then having to do a second role to be the trailblazer, the woman in the woman in the room, the woman on the team. And so you're being the trailblazer and showing that it's actually women can do the job, and they're not there to make the cups of tea. And you also have to be a fighter and a defender. Often there are a lot of well-meaning people out there who want to help you out and have these great opportunities for you to participate in. But frequently these roles can be quite distracting. You spend your time participating in organising a conference, and yes, you learn skills to do that, but after the second or third one, you've probably learnt many of the skills that you need, and you don't need to do it a third or fourth time. And actually that detracts you from your primary role as a researcher to publish and undertake science, and you're judged mostly in getting roles and new positions on your primary role and your publication record. But you had to do 2 other roles, 3 other roles at the same time. So maybe your academic list doesn't look as good as, say, a male counterpart who hasn't had to be the trailblazer and the fighter. They've just had to be able to go in the lab and do some research. So, I think those can be quite challenging to just do 2 or 3 jobs at once, just exhaust you. And after a while, you're just like, nah, I can go find something else. It's not worth it.
I think it kind of reminds me of the how many administration roles that you actually get given that aren't necessarily your job, but, organising journal club groups, that you get given that role because you're just better at it. And when you suggest people who might take over from you being, new males to the group, it's like, oh, but they might not do a very good job. And it's like, well, actually, why don't we give them a chance? Why don't we share it around and not just pick the people who you think will be good at it? Because we all need to develop. We can't just continue on giving roles to people who are just naturally better at them. And classically, why are women seen as better at the admin roles? I think it's just a hangover of previous times. And
that's another example from the technology thing. It's like, why when they went to design Siri and Allegra, and there's a third one, which I can't remember, the default is a woman. The woman is there to serve and cater to every whim. Yeah, which brings into the unconscious bias thing. Sorry.
Yes, yeah. I actually got warned by a senior woman colleague when I was first starting out in my career. You have to be careful to not become the note taker in the room.
Yes.
I was younger, so I was junior at the time. So that was another thing on top of that. But I got warned. She said, you have to make sure that you don't become the note taker, that you're not there to be the note taker. You're there to contribute. And you need to avoid that so you don't get trapped. because people will default to it. And that's really tricky. When you're first starting out, you have to think really hard before every meeting. Am I going to be asked who's in the room? Am I going to be asked to be the note taker? How can I avoid that? What can I do beforehand?
Yeah.
Sending those emails that say, hey, who's going to be taking notes? Who's going to be taking the notes at the meeting? And forcing the other people to start thinking about that, because even, the well-intentioned people just, will naturally look around the room and go, oh, I see someone over there that could take notes. And you're like, nope. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't bring a piece of paper and pen. My apologies. You have to think hard and you have to plan. It's extra energy you put into doing stuff like that.
I think there's also disproportionate worry when you're a woman or someone who identifies as a woman in science, that what the repercussions will be if you say no. So yes. I am a very early career researcher, haven't finished my PhD yet, and I can hand on heart say that I take on way too many things, and I do way too many things outside of my PhD because firstly, I like doing extra things, but also, do I like doing extra things, or have I been conditioned to thinking that I should be doing extra things? And also, I'm just worried that if I say no, people will judge me for it, or I'll be viewed as non-compliant or bossy, or all of these other terms that maybe a male PhD student would be viewed as assertive and time management. And, it's the societal view of what you're doing as well as can also be a barrier.
Unlikability. You say no and you're unlikable. Yeah. Sorry,
yeah,
Jill.
Very tricky. I was going to raise another issue, which is it's bias, whether conscious or unconscious, but there's a lot more men are chosen as keynote speakers, going on, scientific committees and that sort of thing. I attended just last year as an online symposium, and there were 6 men and 1 woman who were keynote speakers now, and I see men that are younger than me being more often invited as keynote speakers than me. Now, why is that? Is that because people don't perceive me as good as them, or, I just don't know, but I think it's a lot harder, to get that recognition.
There's a fantastic book that's just come out called The Authority Gap, and it's by Mary Ann Sieghart. It's called The Authority Gap: Why Women Are Still Taken Less Seriously Than Men and What We Can Do About It. And as one critic puts it, the book draws upon a wealth of research that explores the unconscious bias that belittles and undermines half the population from infancy. Some examples include: men are more likely to interrupt women than they are other men. For example, US Supreme Court justices are 4 times more likely to be interrupted than their male counterparts, and 96% of the time men are doing the interrupting. A study demonstrated that if a piece of information was presented to a group by a man, it was 6 times more likely to be considered pertinent and relevant than if the same piece of information was presented to the group by a woman. In a study of applicants for scientists for time on the Hubble telescope, men outperform women when their gender was known during application, but when applicants were anonymized, women outperform men. So, as far as I see it, this book needs to be required reading because it compiles all the research demonstrating the unconscious bias, which is perceiving men to be more authoritative than women and leading to all of these barriers that we're facing.
Yeah, I think another barrier, sorry to bring up new ones, but is, if there's a position, a leadership position, I think women, this is a bit of a generalization, but are more likely to hold back. They're thinking about their work-life balance and all the other things that they want to do, and they think, can I commit to all of those, that role, when I know it will, I've got these other things that I want to do, and so perhaps less likely to to go for those roles than men might. It's a generalisation, of course, but
I feel like
it's there.
It is an interesting point, though, of those things that we classically think are the woman's role in life. You know, they're looking after the home, they're looking after the children, and those, whether they be an innate thing or a taught thing, they do impact us. Like, I mean, if all genders were taught, you tidy up after yourself, you look after yourself, you wouldn't necessarily have to have all of these households where you do have an uneven balance of who's doing what, which may mean that women feel like they have space to go for those roles that they wouldn't have had otherwise. But yeah, there's just so much complexity behind.
Yeah, there is.
Things.
And I was lucky. My husband, he was the stay-at-home dad, and I was the one that went to work. So he looked after the boys and went to play centre and cooked and washed. And I mean, I helped, of course, but
wouldn't it be nice if that was the norm, that people could parent how they wanted to parent, irrespective of their gender? I think is still very much this. Well, I know of a builder who has Fridays off to spend with his child, and his boss every week hassles him for the fact that he does that. And if he needs to move the day because his wife is a scientist and she needs to travel, it's just not acceptable, because he's got this role that's not typically a man's role, especially in a career like building, which is often dominated by men.
And has a real masculine, hyper masculine thing to do with it.
But I think that comes back to where people get the intersectionality with where the biases in education, and women and girls are raised certain ways to pretend, play with dolls, the colour pink, blue for boys, this trucks, all of this kind of stuff that's kind of becomes this societal pressure, and you have to be, it's really hard to fight against that. I went to an all-girls school. So in the 90s, I wasn't ever taught that I couldn't do anything. Whatever I wanted to be, I could be. And I have an amazing group of girlfriends from that time that I still hang out with all the time. And they're my amazing support system to push me when I, should I go for that? Should I try that out? And they're like, absolutely, go for it. Try it. Why not? And they're an amazing group of people, but not everyone has that. Not everyone has that support that can help you, push you behind you, to push you over a barrier and an obstacle that you face in your career, or any opportunity to go, that's really hard. I had a crappy day because someone was being bad and annoying and a misogynist, or just having some unconscious bias and being an old white man or something to like that, the stereotype old white man or old young man, so that's also really challenging. You have to be taught to believe that you can be whatever you want to be and have whatever role you want to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess that sort of starts to feed into how we can overcome barriers as well, doesn't it? Having support networks and things like that behind us. So with that in mind, what do you think needs to change to encourage and retain women in STEM careers? Would we like to start with Sarah this time?
Yeah, kind of following on from the previous thing, was sometimes it's really hard to know whether someone's treating you the way they're treating you because you are a younger female. And so sometimes it's super important to have other people in the room who will call out behavior that's not okay. And I've seen examples of that being done, and it really does just nip it in the bud. And it makes a big difference to not only the confidence of the person who's being, maybe belittled in the first place or talked down to, but it also kind of sets a precedent of, that's not going to fly here, which I think is really important.
So what sort of things have you seen in practice?
What can we do?
Well, I guess I've had things done to me where I really would have liked someone to stand up for me, and I'm having to learn to stand up for myself, which is a bit difficult when you're taught that if someone says something not very nice, that must be true, so you need to change yourself. But then you kind of realize, oh, I just trod on their ego. And sure, I might manage how I ask that question in the future, but actually that's their thing. It's not my thing. But I did have an example of being in a meeting where, early career researcher, she's working on an area that she hasn't worked on before. It's taken her a while to get into the nitty gritty because it's a massive area. And there was a senior scientist who was like, how long has this taken you? Why is it taking you so long? I could have done this in 3 hours. And it was really good that there was another senior scientist in the room who was just like, she's doing an amazing job. Like, this is complex. And if it was as straightforward as you've made it out to be, then why wouldn't you have been given that task in the first place? So I think it was so important to see that happen. But then the communications that led on after that, it kind of was a springboard for me to raise that to other males in positions of power, men in positions of power within the company, to be like, this is what's happening. And a lot of them weren't really aware. And it then led to conversations of when they'd actually done it to me. And I was able to say, you have done this in the past. So often, I mean, no one wants to think that they're the person who's done that to somebody. No one wants to be that person. But I've noticed a massive behavioral change in the person who I had that conversation with since then, where he's tried to be a lot more kind of respectful and listening to where I was coming from in conversations. So I think it's just giving women a safe place to communicate and learn how to communicate, but also being an ally and an advocate for women. I think a lot of that needs to be happening.
One thing I'd add to that is the classic example is a woman says something in a meeting, has an idea, and then the man says it's ignored completely, and then the man says it, 10 minutes later, and it's suddenly the best idea ever. Why didn't we think of this earlier? And I've seen
so frustrating.
I have seen good examples where the person who's coordinating the meeting, usually a man or anyone really, the ally has said, that sounds great. And I think that was the point that, female person was making earlier. That sounds like a great idea. And I think that's something that everyone can do in a meeting, to say, oh, how is that different to what X was saying, or Y? And just calling it out and acknowledging, even as a woman, acknowledging who the idea came from at the start and coming back to that point in the discussion. I think it's just a really easy thing that can happen. That's a natural part of that you can naturally work into a conversation without any difficulty. But it means a lot when you're not trying to be the only person fighting for an idea. That's the good idea. That's the right thing to do and try.
Yeah.
But having someone else go, yes, it is a good idea, and not trying to, take the idea or work with it and, claim it as their own.
Mm-hmm. Allyship, very important.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to have, as Kieren was saying, a group of people who can support you. So I guess not just mentors, but colleagues, a whole lot of people, so that you get that positive support. You get people that are encouraging you, because I had somebody who said one of those kind of crushing things to me about how, I was, not capable of doing some particular sort of work. And it's really quite devastating to have somebody say that to you. So having other people that can kind of reassure you that actually they're talking through a hole in their head, and people that encourage you. I think, my mother was one of my role models. She didn't do science, but she did do a degree at university, and she was a very strong advocate for women having their own voice, having their own opinions, and standing up and saying that. And that was a really strong role model for me, and I followed that. I found that really valuable. And so I think you can't just be alone. You've got to have people around you that are supporting you. I remember I wanted to go for wasn't called a range review back in those days, but up to the next range, and my boss said, I don't think you're quite ready. And I said, well, I think I am ready, and went ahead and applied for it anyway, and I got it. And then he said, I'm glad I pushed you to go for that range review.
Oh my gosh.
Jeez.
I really hope, that person that told you that you couldn't do it, Jill, has seen your Lifetime Achievement Award.
That would be great, wouldn't it? I don't know if they have. They've left the company now, but
just send them a little
send them an email.
Clipping. Yeah. I think the other thing is that sometimes people try and disguise this ego tripping and this misogyny is like genuine, appropriate criticism in the world of science. You just need to toughen up. And I think people just need to wake up and go, no, you can have constructive criticism that helps people grow and helps improve an idea. And you can just be mean and just attack people just to destroy an idea just because you want to, and you want to have that kind of power trip over people, especially for especially early career and like PhD students who are just starting out, who sometimes don't know how to understand that criticism from that person is they're just having a bad day and they want to destroy you and rip you apart rather than actually help you grow and help you be a better scientist in the end. And we can all learn how to easily be better critics and better responders to information.
But I think it's really interesting. Sorry, Kieren, you finished. Martin can cut me out.
Sorry. I was going to say also that you can also be encouraging. Everyone tends to default to the negative comments and criticisms and what people need to do to fix things to make it better. I think this is a problem many scientific bent people do, because it's like, I've got to make it better. I'm problem solving and sometimes they can break the good bits, trying to fix the bits that are broken, and actually coming back and going, well, actually, that was a really good presentation. They did an amazing job conveying a very complex idea to a broad range audience. And, who cares if they had a few ums and ahs in their presentation or their video didn't work quite well. They did some amazing things. And I think also focusing on providing some positive feedback is also really important. Whenever I peer reviewed, I always started every peer review with a positive comment to kind of say, this is a good publication. This needs to go out there. This, here are my comments, how you can make it better or where you need to bring it up to a certain standard. And I think if everyone did that, that would make the scientific world a better place as well for anyone.
I mean, we're all working towards the same goal of increasing our scientific knowledge, aren't we? So it doesn't make sense that we're cutting people down and not building each other up. But I think what's really interesting is that kind of what we've circled round to is that in order to encourage more women or people who identify as women into science, we need to have a greater level of representation. But in order to retain the women in science, we need to make sure that there's that allyship there and the support within teams and across teams, up and down teams, all around. So it's interesting that we can kind of come to that point.
Is it okay to just kind of mention flexibility around what we view as success in STEM?
Please do.
Because I think that's one of the things previously I've noticed is people get promoted based on you've got X number of papers, so now you get this role. And often those roles then come with management. Just because somebody's good at science doesn't mean they're good at management. And so it's making sure that we're really addressing the areas that people are good in and boosting people's skills in areas that they're not so great in. So, and then also having these multiple different pathways to success. And then, say you are an amazing facilitator or collaborator, or you manage relationships really well. That should be viewed as high as you had a really high impact factor journal, publication that you did by yourself, which is not very common. Like it's that kind of team structure and kind of making sure that you've got this positive environment for people to be working in, and making sure that, there's not just one path to succeeding. And we don't penalize people because they don't look how we think they should look in terms of their career.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's also people that are doing very applied science that, they're not able to do lots of scientific publications. They're doing, they're reaching out to industry and they're making an impact there. So that's a different sort of person that's delivering still great science, but not in the publication area.
I think I'd add to that, it's not just how we measure success, it's all aspects of science. Why does science have to be done in a lab in a certain way? Why can't it be done in the field with citizen science in the backyard? Why we have very narrow views of what a science career is, and I think we need to broaden what those are. And we need to have our science systems be adaptable and reflective. If we waved a magic wand and we fixed what Sarah and Jill were talking about now, and in 20 years' time, it would probably be broken again because we wouldn't have accounted for adaptability and evolution and life and change. So I think our systems also have to be reflective enough to change, to deal with the issues and the biases and the system failures that you find, to make them so they can learn and adapt over time. So you only have to fix them once and they will just continually tune themselves and work out what measures of success are. I mean, who knows in 50 years what science success looks like? It could be something wildly different to what we're talking about today, but we should be building our systems to think about that from now rather than fix it for just what, for the snapshot of today's life. We need to be evolving the science system and learning and trying different things and looking outside the science system for things that work. And, just because we do the things in a traditional way, where did that tradition come from? Is it back from the 1800s of science when it was old rich white men in England doing the research, or is it someone, 10 years from now that we don't know who they are that is doing science somewhere cool in a forest somewhere? And, that may require some different measures of success in terms of scientific endeavour.
Yeah, which all hinges from requiring a good foundation of diversity.
Yep.
Yeah, that adaptability and agility is super important, because sometimes you introduce a change and there are unforeseen things that you didn't expect that come from that. So you need that ability to be like, oh, we didn't see that coming. Here's a change. Here's another way we could do this. So that goes away. And that things will change over time.
Embrace that imperfection of today, and know that you won't have it perfect forever and ever. It's perfect for now, or it's pretty good for now, but we've brought in something that will make it stay at 80% good the whole way.
So it sounds like we need some really some very broad skills if we want to enter science, and some very holistic thinking. So what advice would you give to women beginning their careers in science? Should we start with you, Kieren?
I can tell you, I tell this to everyone I talk to. It's communication. They don't teach you communication at, when you get your undergrad degrees in science. It's, you go into a lab and you do some magical experiments, take 3 hours, and they perfectly work or perfectly not work in a certain way to teach you about how to do experiments. And then you kind of rote learn a lot of information because there's a lot to learn in the knowledge system. But they don't teach you that actually to be a successful scientist, you have to be able to communicate, because, hey, you're going to have to publish your work or write your thesis. And if you don't know how to write your thesis or your publication, you're not going to do it very well. You're going to have to present at conferences, no matter how scary they are, stand in front of a poster and talk awkwardly to a stranger you've never met from the other side of the world. you're going to need to know how to do that. And hey, odds are you don't know how to do something in a lab, and you need to talk to someone to ask them to teach you how to do that experiment methodology. So, like, they don't tell you this, but communication skills and working with people are the fundamentals of a successful science career. You can pick up the knowledge after that, so start building those.
Good science is not done in an echo chamber. And I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of what I think is important in science. And it is that communication, because you need to get other people's feedback and insights into making sure that your research is as best as it can possibly be. And what I will add, just to your point, Kieren, is that you're going to need to know how to communicate with your supervisors and ask for help when you need it from your supervisors or other people in your team. And if you learn that skill early, you'll be set up for success the whole way through.
And relationship building is massively important. If you go to a conference and you meet people and you're able to communicate with them about what you do and what they do, that's a collaboration right there, just from having those conversations. But if you can't chat with people and just build relationships, then you're going to have a difficult time with that. But I kind of feel like it feeds into, it's okay to be who you are in those interactions. Like, obviously personal growth, very important, but you don't need to be what people think you should be. It's okay to be you in those and be authentically yourself, because people tend to really value that in relationships.
I always think also, if you're like, an international speaker that's turning up at a conference that isn't a giant international conference, but a small kind of local one, like an Australasian one. I always felt very, tried to be very inclusive of like these keynote speakers who might be very influential people, but often these smaller conferences are attended by PhD students, postdocs, who don't necessarily have a lot of confidence, and they may have read this amazing scientist's bio and all of their publications and be completely intimidated. And I always used to think, yes, but they're this person who may have never been to this country before. Maybe they just want to have a coffee and chat about science with you. And I always used to try and, bring, as I got more, confident, and like, it's okay. They're people too. They're great scientists, but they're also just people who maybe just want to have coffee and talk about science with you. And you just kind of bring them in, and it kind of works both ways.
And if you happen to have an awkward interaction with someone, that's not always on you. So I think, unfortunately, and it might be stereotypical, but we can be a bit of an odd bunch, people in science. So we're not always great at the social stuff when we're working on it. But if you don't always get the response you want in an interaction, that's fine too. It was worth giving it a go. I think, sometimes it's just putting yourself out there is scary, but you do have to give it a try.
You do. Stepping a little bit out of your comfort zone, that would be something I would say. You've got to, doing things that are just comfortable and easy. You've got to push yourself a little bit and do things that are a little bit scary, but you actually you think, I can't do that, but actually you can. Not too big a step, but, always trying to, push yourself. And so I think that's something I would say. The other thing, and it's the same as communication, is working in teams. You don't get experience of working in teams. And, when you do your PhD, it's very much, you're very insular and focused on your own science and your own research. And yet then when you go and work particularly in a research institute, you don't work on your own, you're working in a team, and having the experience of learning how to work in a team and rely on others and use the strengths of everybody in that team. I think that's really important.
I think I'd add to that as well. Start thinking about your career now, from wherever you are, in the kind of your journey towards becoming a scientist, whether you're thinking about getting a PhD or a master's. What area of science are you in, and what's necessary? Maybe you only need a master's. Maybe you don't even need a master's. Maybe you need a PhD. But start thinking about where you want to go next and the time after that, because that helps you kind of deflect the unwanted opportunities that people expect you to do, like lead a journal club or organize a conference for the third time, because you can start to build up skills. Or, if you go to an overseas conference and it turns out you want to, go study in a certain country or in a certain group, you can go have a friendly chat, just a quiet one with their current students to go, is this a good place to be? Is it friendly? Is it useful? Or are you going to be expected to work 20 hours a day and, have 4 hours of sleep underneath your desk and get back into it? And maybe that's not for everyone. Maybe it's for you. But I think if you start thinking about, where are you at? Where do you want to be next? Or maybe the time after that, and start to kind of build some knowledge of what those steps look like. So then it's just like a little hop, not a gigantic long jump. It's easier said than done. And it's not quite, I'm not saying you have to have your A to B straight line perfect career. That's certainly not my experience. But if you start to think about the next bits, you can start to kind of edit out the things that are distracting you from the type of career and science that you want.
Yeah. And I think that's where having colleagues and mentors that you can kind of bounce your ideas off is really helpful. Thinking around, what is it that you're passionate about? Is it doing the science, or do you actually like working in teams and interacting with people? And so, it might not just be about getting the PhD or the masters or whatever, but it might be some of those extra things might actually be things that you really love. So, organising that conference or being on that committee, they might be the sorts of things that you really are passionate and enjoy. And so, you've got to see what are the steps that you need to take to get to where you want to head, and be prepared to change your mind and go in a different direction.
To be fair, my postdoc was coming to an end in New Zealand, and I wanted to live in New Zealand, so I had to think a bit differently about my career. And it's my boss at the time, my mentor, that said, have you thought about this job here? Which was a kind of a research, a shift sideways into research management that would keep me in the company and in New Zealand where I wanted to be, would challenge me in different ways. And to be honest, I've never looked back. I love being in research management, and you couldn't drag me back to the lab bench. As fun as it was, I got very disheartened every time my experiments failed. But I love being in research management, and had my mentor not told me about this opportunity and said, you should think about it, you'd be good at this, I wouldn't have even started the career that I have now, that I absolutely love. So be open to new opportunities as well.
I think mentors are so important for that lateral thinking as well. I think if I could go back to the beginning of my PhD, I've wanted to have a mentor the entirety of my PhD career, and even before that, probably through to my honours. And it's only been I've had mentors throughout the course, but it's probably only in the last 6 months or so that I've found a mentor who really challenges the way that I view my career and where I'm going. And I think that's been the absolute best thing possible for me at the stage of my PhD that I'm at now. And I wish that I had it earlier, and I wish I could have gone back to past Erin and said, this is exactly what you should have done, and it will help you progress through your career. And it sounds like, Kieren, you've certainly had a really good experience with a mentor that's helped shape your career and move you into the place that you wanted to go.
Yeah, it actually was my former boss. So often you try and get mentors that are not your bosses. But in this case, it was my postdoc supervisor, Robin, and she is an amazing person who develops the people around her. That's a real passion of hers, and I had the benefit of being a part of her team. And she pushed me to think really differently about my career, and also how I interacted with people in the lab and my role as a postdoc in the lab. And I just learned so much from observing her, writing grants and interacting with people around her, and just how she is as a person. And she's so open and inviting, and she challenges you, but she's also really open to ideas and explains things so well that, I'm not sure I'd have the career that I have without her. And I always learn new things from everyone around me. I'm always trying to learn new things. and try and understand that even, you could be a mentor that someone maybe you think is a junior to you because they're a PhD student and you're a postdoc, or you're a research manager and someone's a postdoc or a researcher in the lab. And it's like, well, actually, if they're the expert in the area, they're the person that sometimes you need to listen to understand what's happening. And they've got the knowledge that you can get. So I don't think don't limit yourself to one person, although I've had some amazing mentors. Try and learn from everyone around you.
You've had a lot of experience with mentoring as well, haven't you, Jill?
Yeah, so I guess I didn't really have any kind of formal mentors, and I had a few people that were instrumental in pushing me along, but at the same time they held me back a bit as well. So it was a kind of interesting situation, but I really missed that, and so I've been really passionate about trying to be a mentor or encourage other people to mentor emerging researchers. And yeah, I was so passionate about it that when I became a science group leader, I thought this is a chance, and I put on my plan for the next year, I'm going to organise a mentoring program for people in my group. And then I went to the training development person in HR and said, I've promised to do this. Can you help me? and that was Mark, and we and he and the three of us worked on developing a mentoring program, and now it's been rolled out to the rest of plant and food research. So, and yeah, I really feel passionately that it's helpful for people to encourage them to get into their careers.
Have you had experience with mentors, Sarah?
Yeah, I have. I've found them extremely valuable, and like Jill, as part of my early career researcher role in the Royal Society, I'm trying to set up a mentoring program there with early career researchers and fellows or companions. It's in the early days because we've got green paper stuff that we're working on at the moment, but it's one of the things that I really want to get sorted before my term as co-chair is up, because I feel like I don't think I would be where I am if I hadn't had a variety of different people kind of pushing me and challenging me and asking me, where I want to go and what I want to do, and then supporting me through that. But I think it's been really important for me to find people who I identify with or who represent the type of person or leader that I would like to be, because I think I've always been a relatively shy person, and I've always liked to take time to think about things. And then you constantly see people who are just really quick, and they'll say things and they'll be like, oh, that person from that paper said this. And I'm like, oh, I'd have to go back and check that to make sure I was right. And it's really nice to then come across people like one of the group general managers in plant and food, who is just one of the loveliest people, who is just considered and thoughtful. And I had him as a feed forward coach. So as part of the leadership program within Plant and Food, the Cornerstones program, you get feed forward coaches where you ask them questions and then they come back with ways that they might address a problem. And then you get to pick and then you action those things. And it was really interesting to see how different people meet the same problem. Mm-hmm. And then you could kind of find the things that actually gelled with you as a person, that you felt most comfortable, suited your values and how you wanted to do things. And it was really nice to just realize you didn't have to change yourself too much. You could be a quiet leader, and that was totally fine too. You didn't need to become this crazy extroverted person that didn't sit well with you to then succeed in your career. So I think having those people, but then also having people who backed me, who when I got my permanent position, it was because there was a team of people who said, yeah, she can do that. You should give her this slightly unusual role where she's going to try and pull together research and a group of people from across the company working on things and try and get work going. she has that ability, just give her a chance. And it just gives you amazing confidence in yourself that you've got people who really back you.
I think mentors can really help with two of the things we've already talked about today, which is helping break down the barriers that women and people who identify as women face in their science careers, but also helping to retain them in their science careers because it gives you that support network. Have you had a mentor, Hilary?
My current line manager, Dr. Robert Schaffer, has always been an excellent mentor for me throughout my whole career. But in terms of women, currently I'm completing my PhD soon and submitting in 4 months' time. Yay! Woohoo. And my co-supervisor, Dr. Kieren David, has always been inspirational. In fact, all of the women that I came across through the School of Biological Sciences at Auckland University have always inspired me, from Dr. Judy O'Brien to Dr. Joe Putterall, Dr. Robin McDermott, who I think was the Robin you're talking about, Kieren.
Yep.
Did one lecture during an undergrad paper, and she blew my mind. She was so passionate about this topic and brought a whole new perspective on it. Plant architecture, I think it was at the time. And I just, they've all inspired me and all given me different, through observation. I have taken different parts of their way of working and bits that, resonate with me and have aspired to implementing them in my life. So luckily we have some great female representation within biology here in New Zealand. Yeah, they can't be understated, the importance of having female role models for other women who are, again, coming back to what we were talking about, allies. They want to develop you and help you succeed. Yeah, very important. So to finish on this International Women's Day celebration, I'd like to come back to you and your science and ask you what contribution to your field are you most proud of? We start with you, Jill.
Oh, there's so many things. 41 years. How am I going to pick one thing? It's pretty hard because I've worked on a huge range of crops, and I've been located in 5 different places around the world and, done all sorts of different things. I guess more close to now is more applied science. So we've recently been working on developing new orchard growing systems, and I've been working on cherry and apricot, and others in the team have worked on apple and pear. And these new systems are able to double productivity for a certain land area and still keep high fruit quality. So, something that's going to have a big impact on the industry, that for me is what drives me, is having something that is making a difference.
That's great. How about you, Sarah?
It's quite a tricky question because I feel like I'm so fresh in my career. I'm like, what have I even achieved? I think
stop that. We don't take self-deprecating comments here, Sarah.
It's just quite interesting because I think I really value things that are going to make a difference for kind of horticulture in New Zealand. That's one of the things I'm super passionate about. And I think part of it is just a lot of the research, especially in your early days, is just really incremental changes to that. And I think in my master's, I was researching flowering in kiwi fruit, and it's quite interesting how things have come full circle, because I think that project was laying a little bit of groundwork for work that has then gone on. And so I was looking at a flowering activator and how powerful that was in kiwi fruit. It turns out very powerful if you overexpress it. They flower teeny tiny and aren't very productive plants. And that then led my supervisor down the track of knocking out repressors instead. And so now there's this amazing model that has come from that everybody's using, including myself and my current research. And I know that was a massive team thing that kind of, after I left that project and went on to my PhD and completely changed tacks in terms of research, it's nice to see how that's then kind of gone on. to being something that's really, really useful for science research.
Well done. How about you, Kieren?
Well, if we were talking actual scientific discoveries, I'd have to go probably back way too far. So I'm just going to pick something because I get to do what I want, and I'm allowed to. I'm just, ignoring what you've suggested, and I'm going to talk about something else. I'm really proud of whenever I have someone tell me how the system that I've created has helped them. Or, oh, gee, thanks. Or, gee, that system is really easy to use. And that makes me happy. And I'm really proud of those moments because that's what I love to do, is to make it so that scientists can do science and make amazing discoveries to change the world. And I'm really good at organizing systems and creating environmentals, the research system that supports them and making it work for them. And so every time a system or a piece of activity that I've, contributed to has made life for a scientist easier, and that, it might be an offhand comment that they make in a meeting or anything like that. And I just kind of go, oh, wow, I'm kind of, I have like little happy sparks of joy that I was part of making that happen.
Yeah, you do a great job, Kieren.
Thank you, Jill.
How about you, Erin?
I, like Sarah, feel like I'm quite early in my scientific career. So I do have lots of scientific things that I'm proud of. But I think the thing that I'm most proud of on reflection at the moment is I do a lot of teaching at the university in the lab setting. And I think the thing that makes me the proudest is when I'll be teaching a student how to do something or coaching them through their answer. And you see that moment when their little eyes spark and they realize not only that they've understood the scientific thing that we're looking at, but also they kind of get that thing where they realize that they can be a scientist too. It's that recognition that they can see themselves in the place that they're wanting to go. And maybe they didn't have that before. And I think every time that happens, I'm just so inspired to go and do more research myself. So I think that's the thing I'm proudest of at the moment. I'd love to hear yours, Hilary.
Oh, thanks. I am going to go with a research thing because even though I'm, a fledgling, early career researcher, I was given as part of my PhD, another sort of side project came along where we were going to sequence the genome of the plant I'm working on, and it was originally going to be a small thing, which developed into a big thing. And we got a lovely paper out of it. And it's a really cool genome that really is a bit of a, well, we called it a bit of a Rosetta Stone for the whole of the Rosaceae plant family. So I'm really, really, even though it was a sideline thing, not the main topic of my PhD, I'm really, really happy that we did that and really proud of that. Yeah.
It's really cool. I love that we're all able to celebrate things about ourselves because we're not normally very good at doing that. So cool to hear everyone's achievements. And also just, want to express a very big thank you to our panelists today. It's been an absolute joy to be able to pick your brains and hear your experience as women in science, but also how we think that we can improve the system for women and people who identify as women coming through the Science Channel at the moment. And also thank you out there to our listeners for listening to today's episode. Please check out our Sigest pages on our Plant and Food website for extra links and photos on today's topic. Please subscribe to our channel on iTunes or your favorite podcast provider. And don't forget to post a review and rate this podcast. See you in the next one.